Welcome to an adventure in Rust. Waking up on the beach, I swiftly grabbed my rock and began gathering resources to kickstart my next journey on this beginner-friendly, low-population vanilla server. Hi there! You might not know me, but I'm a casual Rust player. And despite my limited time, I just love the game and always find a way to enjoy it at my own pace. You can call me Sib, short for Siberios, and welcome to my channel. And I have been posting some YouTube short videos about tips and tricks about Rust, but I am excited now to present to you my first full-length video that I truly hope you all enjoy. Please forgive me and bear with me that English is not my mother language, and also excuse myself for the lack of PvP on this gameplay. And after gathering some resources through farming, I began constructing my starter base. And with my starter base completed, I decided to gather a bit more wood and stone. However, I did not know that I was being watched. That was a close call. I ended up reinforcing my base with stone and added locked doors, finally making it feel more secure. I marked my house on the map as I decided this would be the location of my base through this wipe. And after some time, I thought it would be wise to familiarize myself with the surroundings. I was also checking if the player was there, camping outside my house. But no, didn't see anyone. After gathering a bit more stone and wood, I returned home and crafted a TC and made some additional upgrades to my home. And after placing the TC in the small box, I went farming one more time. With the base down, I also needed a furnace. And for the furnace, I need some animal fat, so I went hunting. Upon returning home, I crafted the furnace, knowing it would be crucial for our progression and for producing metal fragments. While the metal fragments were smelting in the furnace, I decided to upgrade my base. And after upgrading my base, I installed the door and relocated the furnace to a different spot to facilitate the access to the upper part of the base. Then I began setting up the honeycomb to avoid offline raids. Taking advantage of the sunset, I retreated indoors and crafted a metal door, and reinforced the core of my base with a metal door, further fortifying it against potential raids. At this point, I would not be echo raided anymore. After farming and feeding my furnaces, I ventured out to explore the surrounding neighborhood. I farmed a bit of scrap, scavenged some barrels and crates, During my exploration, I encountered a friendly individual at the ranch, and though we exchanged greetings without speaking, we parted ways peacefully. In desperate need of scrap, I decided to recycle some components at the mining outpost. I needed to be careful because of the presence of nearby player bases. Danger was lurking. It was during this time that I stumbled upon a small naked player farming trees. I attempted to interact with him, but it quickly retracted into his house, and I thought it was just not worthy of pursuit. I recycled the remaining components and resumed gathering materials for my base. However, my efforts were interrupted by the appearance of another player. Given my subpar aiming skills, especially with a bow and arrow, I hesitated to engage. Additionally, being marked by the game prevented me from approaching the range, risking the loss of the 140 scrap. I arrived home and already have enough resources for a level 1 workbench, so I could start researching some tools. With the metal fragments I had been making in the furnaces, I ended up upgrading the front door and went exploring. In fact, I grabbed some spare wooden doors that I had, since I wouldn't use them for anything else, and decided to go to the outpost to recycle them. But things didn't go as I expected. I ended up being chased by a bear, and this happened twice. And after this incident, I arrived safely at the outpost and started recycling the doors that I no longer needed. I also recycled some components that I found along the way and began my journey back home. I spotted another player farming rocks, but it wasn't worth the confrontation, so I let them go. I farmed a bit more metal for the furnaces and headed back home. Once again, I made some upgrades to the base. I was running low on food at home, and since I'm practically in bear territory, with so many bears showing up around my base, I killed one to have enough food. And after this break, I resumed upgrading my house, straightening my core once again to prevent offline and echo raids. I had in a window to see if any neighbors would join in, and finally I installed the metal door to make my house a bit more difficult to raid. I placed the excess material inside the TC and started upgrading the core of my base with a few more minor upgrades. After this, I was quite pleased with the end result and decided to take a stroll to see what was happening in the neighborhood. I found some bases, some 2x1s, nothing too big. This is just a solo server, so I don't think players will build crazy bases. Since they are also playing solo, the upkeep, even though it's a 50% upkeep server, would be annoying to farm just to maintain the base. It's a bit tedious. I killed another animal and returned home, finally managing to craft a research table, which will be very useful for researching all the blueprints we don't want to put in the workbench. I placed the research table, and since I was near the lighthouse, I decided to take a look and see what loot I could bring back. I started searching inside the lighthouse, but to my surprise it had already been looted. There was no green card. Recycling inside the lighthouse turned out to be a great help for me this wipe, and being so close to home is a big plus. Since there was nothing left to loot, I ended up heading back home. With some rough terrain, I had to take a long way around. I took the opportunity to farm a bit more and return home safely, with a little more scrap in my inventory. I made some more changes at home and upgraded my core. I also placed a rug, and just before going to bed, after spending a few hours on wipe day, I honeycombed my base. Installed some doors, windows, and then retreated into my bunker before going offline. Tomorrow is a new day. On the next day, I wandered around the surrounding area searching for resources. I played some bets, and just right near my base I found someone farming. I tried to provoke a conflict, but they weren't interested and retreated into their cabin. I took this time to return to the lighthouse, making a few more runs through it. Finally, it hadn't been looted yet. I managed to reach the top of the lighthouse with one crate still unopened. I noticed that there were some neighbors on the other side of the island with quite big houses. I recycled the remaining components and returned home. It turns out that I've noticed there were some cabins near my base. That's when I decided to stir up a bit of chaos and try to initiate a raid. I had some fire arrows that did little to nothing against the cabin structure, but I still tried. However, since my efforts were in vain, I decided to retreat into my house and start a new project. This new project was perhaps to create an indoor farm. Later, I went to check out my neighbor's cabin, who had just recently hid from me. Since I didn't see anything interesting, I ended up farming some barrels and had another encounter with another player. The person heard me farming the barrels and started to flee. But I wasn't successful in engaging with them either, as I couldn't even hit them with an arrow. Let me say that I don't have the best aim. I'm sorry. As they were already heading towards to the safe zone, it wasn't worth investing in engagement. I placed another bag and made a few more rounds before returning home. I arrived home and started learning some blueprints at the workbench, but I noticed I didn't have enough scrap to make a compound bow, so I quickly left to gather a bit more scrap. On my way home in this rush, I noticed that my neighbor already has quite a substantial house. A bit too big for my taste. Maybe I should pay a bit more attention to it. I finally arrived home, learned how to craft the compound bow. I also took the opportunity to step away from the computer and go offline for a while. Back on the server, I decided to check on my neighbor's cabin again. But there it was. It barely had any damage. So I decided to not focus more efforts on it. Instead, I took the opportunity to farm more scrap. I got into a fight with a scientist. He didn't die with the first arrow, but he did in the second. And the loot he had wasn't bad at all. During one of the runs, I found a DB, a double barrel shotgun. Since I didn't have enough scrap to research it, I made another trip to the lighthouse. When I got back home, I had enough scrap and learned how to craft the DB. Very nice. I really needed a reliable weapon, so I wanted a revolver. A bit later, I was interrupted by the sound of someone farming. I thought it might be a more advanced player, but it turned out to be a naked person. Since I didn't want any trouble, I just stole the stone he had. I picked him up from the ground and he even almost thanked me. After all this, I went to explore what was at the power plant. I found some interesting loot. I tried to do the green card puzzle, but then I remembered I needed fuses. And since I didn't have any fuses with me, I just gave up on that and went back to farming barrels and crates. I also got into a fight with another scientist. He didn't die with a headshot. And he didn't die with another arrow. He finally died with the third arrow. And he had a syringe, which I will be researching later. Still on the same run at the power plant, I found a crate that had a medical kit. This is huge and will come in very handy. When I got home, I immediately started researching the syringe. I placed another rug. Since we already had the DB research, we could now craft more DBs and research the medical kit and a shotgun shell. In the meantime, I took the opportunity to redecorate the color of the walls in my house in white. It looks so much better now. I also changed the skin of the rugs to give them a more jungle-like appearance. Also, here's a compilation of more upgrades. Very nice. I feel so much more comfortable and secure leaving my house alone when I'm offline. And after all that, I still didn't have enough scrap to learn the revolver. and I was interrupted again by another player.
You are getting raided by me now. You are getting raided.
Funny, as he was trying to raid my house with a stone. But it was so dark that I couldn't barely see. Eventually, I found a way. Poor guy, he didn't have anything either. Later on, I decided to do a naked run to the ferry terminal. I started picking up berries and found a shotgun. I also went to recycle at the fishing village and was interrupted again by another player who was trying to steal my loot. And he succeeded. Literally. But he had other intentions. He ended up returning my loot and even returning more components to me. And as I started to thank him, I was already predicting his fate. And he ended up dying to the turrets of the fishing village. Thank you, stranger, I guess. I forgot to hit the record button and here I am near my house, setting up a vending machine with some charcoal to see if I could earn scrap a little faster. After this, I started my next project. I placed the plant box on my roof and returned to my small vending machine base to see if I could get more scrap. I grabbed some corn clones and started planting them. It was raining, which is always great for the plant box to start filling with water. Water is what plants will absorb, so it's always important for the plant box to have water. After another run at the lighthouse, I made a pit stop at my vending machine just to check if someone have bought anything. I added some green cards to see if anyone wanted them in exchange for scrap, but no one bought anything. I also installed 2 solar panels and began working on the electrical circuit of the house. So I noticed that there was a player on the server selling a revolver in exchange for 35 scrap, which was a pretty good deal if you ask me. So I tried to take advantage of it, but my journey would be a bit turbulent to the outpost. After evading another player, I finally arrived safely at the outpost and tried to buy the revolver from the shop. But to my surprise, it said that the drone couldn't reach it. That's a shame. I ended up feeding my horse and went to investigate the player's house. As I had suspected, the vending machine was inside the house, which might explain why the drone couldn't reach it. So I grabbed my horse again and went back home, empty-handed. I arrived at home, crafted a double barrel, and checked the status of my crops to see if I had any corn crops with good genes worth keeping. But I wasn't lucky, so I harvested them, collected the corn, planted the only good cloth seed I had, and immediately hit the jackpot. It was a perfect clone. I disposed of the rest of the crops, crafted another plant box, and placed it on the roof with more seeds. I made more plant boxes and planted them around my base. I also made some lights for the electrical circuit to provide light for the plants inside the house. I connected everything and finally the plants had light indoors. After some time my imp clone was getting more mature, so I cloned it again and placed them in the other plant box. I went for another run at the lighthouse and noticed that a neighbor of mine had a tugboat. I'd like to have a tugboat. Perhaps it's an idea for the next wipe? Maybe? Since I was having trouble getting drinkable water, I decided to craft a water purifier. It turns salt water into fresh water for the plants. I had to fill the jerry can with salt water and poured that water into the purifier. I also crafted a water catcher, something that collects water, the rainwater. But it didn't go well the first time I poured the water into the plant box. It seemed like I missed the plant box and it didn't recognize the water. A bit later, my crops were finally starting to yield some results. I made some more clones and planted them indoors. I also started to notice that my horse was making lots of dung, and those dung piles were rolling down the hill, so I decided to start collecting them and then start decomposing them to make fertilizer. I went back to my vending machine, but no one bought anything. Upon returning home from another run from the mining outpost, I checked the status of my crops, but it seems I wasn't lucky again with the genetics. But finally I had enough scrap to craft the revolver, which I did right away. I also took the opportunity to plant finally my first berries, and I also researched the revolver bullets. At this point I was checking the genes of my berries. They weren't the best, but oh well, it is what it is. I took the opportunity to start gathering a bit of sulfur, which is quite abundant in this area. I returned to the vending machine and once again no one bought anything. Back at home I started putting a shelter on the roof, to prevent players from shooting at my crops. I began changing the shelter from wood to metal and changed its color to green because why not? I started crafting sprinklers to place in my indoor plantations and began making all the necessary connections. And now it was time to turn on the sprinklers. At first I found it strange that the sprinkler wasn't working, but then I remembered that in this game there are physics and gravity also plays a role. That's why my sprinklers weren't able to connect with each other. So, to simplify, I created a connection between one sprinkler and another, and left a section of my plant boxes to be manually watered. I also made a water barrel that will be used to connect with the water catcher. I changed the connection so that the water catcher can send water to the water barrel. And yes, I can confirm that the water barrel is being filled with water. And then I made the necessary connections to link everything to the circuit. With the sprinklers connected, the barrel is being drained. I poured the excess water I had in the jerrycan into the barrel and then returned to my crops. Finally, my berries were growing, but they weren't ready for harvest yet. I again forgot to press record and harvested the berries I had and planted them to reproduce even more berries. Over time, they continued to grow. I also made some minor upgrades to my base. I replaced the wooden windows with metal ones. I noticed that I had another perfect clone of Imp. And finally, the berries were starting to bear fruit. They weren't perfect clones, but what I had was enough. Isn't that beautiful? So I had to be away from the PC for some time and now most of my crops were dying. So I had to harvest them, which basically only gave me plant fibers good for composting. I returned to the vending machine and since I wasn't getting any buyers, I had to lower the prices. I researched the mixing table to make some use of the berries and start making some teas. I focused on the berries and made some healing tea. In the meantime, I went on some runs in search of scrap. On the way home, I also picked up some berries. I also start making sulfur in the mixing table, which is a much more faster way to do it. I crafted a level 2 workbench and we won't need this anymore. Now I was crafting some syringe. I checked the status of my crops, berries and crafted the composter. Horse poop and plant fibers is what I need to make fertilizer. I took advantage and started putting this fertilizer into the plant boxes to see what it really does. And this way the plants are much happier. I started researching some clothing blueprints. They might be coming handy if I die to a player and lose my clothes. I began distributing the fertilizer among the plant boxes, and the plants were increasingly pleased with the results. That's when I noticed that in the bandit camp they were offering scrap for fertilizer. So I decided to gather all the fertilizer I had to sell it to bandit camp, in exchange for scrap. Meanwhile, I harvested some of my crops that were more or less ready. I'm a bit impatient, you know. I didn't want to wait forever. I had the brilliant idea to expand the farm inside my base. After giving some upgrades to the new farm, I decided to take the fertilizer and go to the bandit camp to trade for scrap. I spent quite some time there as I run out of stock often. I also gamble a little at the roulette, but I wasn't lucky. And then I went back to sell all the fertilizer I had. I managed to receive about 400 scrap, which is quite good, and just as I was arriving home I was attacked by a bear. It was really close. Then I started to install the battery, placed the composter inside the new farm, began to change the lamps, sprinklers, plant boxes, switches, pumps, everything to that place. I harvested the remaining corn and started to feed the new farm with its contents. At this time I had some berries hanging around and decided to make some teas to see what it's all about. So I started to make a basic wood tea that will give me wood for the rest of the wipe, and also made an advanced horde tea. I drank the basic wood tea and went farming some trees. And I can confirm that, yeah, the tea works well. It's quite convenient, actually. And after moving all the stuff and making all the connections, the farm was fully functional. With water, light, ready to host whatever I wanted in terms of farming. With the basic wood tea still active, I went farming a little more. I also drank an advanced horde tea and went farming some rocks, and the boost provided was sufficient for the rest of the wipe. After a brief visit of my vending machine, I noticed it was futile of effort. No one seemed interested in buying anything from it. Whoa, and there's another perfect clone right there. The berries, not lucky. So it was the last day of the wipe. The server was already dying, there were few players left, and I decided to go out with a bang. Because why not? I made some healing teas to restore my health, and then I headed to the tunnel to end it all with a bang, once again. I made my way to the tunnels and started shooting. I was trying to make something out of it, don't mind my aim. I could barely see because it was all very dark. I still managed to get some loot. Got a revolver that I had been longing for, and yeah, if only this had been at the beginning of the wipe, but oh well. I continued on my journey through the tunnels. I almost died a few times. If it weren't for the mats, if it weren't for the syringes and bandages, I was dead long ago. And after some farming, I decided to continue through the tunnels to come out near the supermarket. But then, nothing went as I expected. And that's how I died. Having just respawned at home, I went to check the status of my crops for the last time. I had planted potatoes, which I didn't get to harvest. I went up to the roof, drank a little water, and that's how I decided to say goodbye to this wipe. It was a good journey. It was 4 days of playtime. Here's an applause for this. This was my first adventure recording for this channel. Thank you so much to everyone for watching. If you watch all the way through this kind of gameplay, thank you very much for watching. This was the first time that I've made a video like this. I will try and continue with the short videos on this channel. I hope you all enjoyed, and if you did, click the subscribe button. It helps me a lot to grow the channel. Like, comment, and yeah guys, that's it. Take care and see you in the next video. And still nobody bought anything. God damn.